The statements that were made today by the Israeli Prime Minister clearly indicate that we're heading towards a new phase in the genocide of Gaza and a new phase in the war altogether. Benjamin Netanyahu today said that Israel will not be submitting or surrendering to the Hamas after their propaganda, or what he called as propaganda videos that they published of the prisoners of war, blaming Hamas of starving them to death, of course denying the fact that he himself declared cutting off any supplies to the Gaza Strip back in March. Ever since then, the situation has been deteriorating for the Palestinian population and also for the Israeli prisoners of war. So if Benjamin Netanyahu isn't looking for a ceasefire, where are we going? This is what we're going to discuss in this video, alongside a reading of the latest developments, both internally inside of Israel and also globally, based on the reactions that are coming in from international states and heads of state, politicians, and countries that are close also to Israel. Firstly, Benjamin Netanyahu, for the first time in several months, started to use the term eliminating the Hamas again. Netanyahu started to talk about taking down Hamas's military capabilities, but today he came up with a very short video. He didn't look very well in that video, and he said that Hamas are having this cynical and psychological warfare approach towards us with these videos, and that we will not surrender to Hamas and we will still continue. How is he going to continue? And of course, the target is to eliminate the Hamas again, something he refrained from saying for several months back. So we're going back to the initial statements that he had in the beginning. What does that say exactly, and where are things headed to? Well, initially, we need to understand, where is Israel at? The day after tomorrow, so in 2 days, Benjamin Netanyahu is supposed to have a meeting where he will discuss with the military leadership inside of Israel the future of the operations in Gaza. Israel is almost completely finished with what it calls Gideon's chariots, another huge failure coming from Israel. They could not eliminate the Palestinian resistance, and they withdrew Division 98, humiliated, after they suffered huge losses inside of the Gaza Strip. But he's going to be facing a lot of resistance coming from the IDF. Why? Well, the IDF chief of staff canceled a visit to the United States because he did not want to go to the United States without a clear vision to end the war. He's not making these harsh statements across mainstream media, but his actions are proving what he actually wants: a ceasefire. He was pressing on the political leadership to reach a political solution, a diplomatic solution, and have a ceasefire. He was pressing towards that direction, but Benjamin Netanyahu did not make that decision. In addition, the IDF, they don't really know what's being required from them anymore. In Gideon's chariots, they went ahead with this campaign and tried to achieve the objectives, occupying 75% of the Gaza Strip and continuing with the operations where the Palestinian resistance is. But they withdrew Division 98 now. So where are things going exactly? From his perspective, the IDF isn't capable. That is known on the ground as a fact. Israel suffered huge losses in Gaza. They're trying to force conscription on the Orthodox community. They're failing so far, and they're unable to address the huge crisis in relation to people refusing to serve in the army and people never wanting to serve in the IDF ever again. On the other hand, the families of the prisoners of war are increasing the tone to levels that have never been seen in Israel before, blaming Israel outright of the Holocaust. Today, another one said that it's Israel that is the enemy, said that he feels Israel is the enemy, but not Hamas or the PIJ in Gaza, because of what Israel is doing, and that the political leadership doesn't have any vision for the future. And that's something that some analysts in Israel believe is linked to messianic or even religious beliefs that Netanyahu might have, because there is no explanation. Firstly, in relation to the political side of things, Benjamin Netanyahu can go to a ceasefire now without having a direct threat to his government and coalition. He was offered a safety net by the Israeli opposition. Therefore, he can go, and even when the Israeli Knesset goes back from the break in 3 months, he will still have a safety net to continue his government up until early elections. Then there were statements coming from Netanyahu himself just several weeks back that we are looking to make very important decisions. He even met with some of his harshest critics from the families of the prisoners of war, and there were feelings amongst these people that he is actually headed towards a solution. He's being backed now by the United States administration, who are saying we need to look for an alternative to have a deal and get the people back. We need to find an alternative to get the people back without a deal with Hamas, because according to them, Hamas doesn't want a deal. Although Hamas offered them a deal from the beginning and even before the beginning many times, and Israel refused. And whenever there were deals, it was Israel who broke these deals and the ceasefires and went ahead to a full-blown starvation campaign in Gaza. How is Benjamin Netanyahu planning to do that? He's not outright saying we want military rule over Gaza. He's not outright saying that we want to build settlements, but we know very well that key elements in his government, his key allies, top aides in the government, want that very clearly. Some of them are now saying, cut the oxygen off of the Gaza Strip, as if they had the option to stop air from going into the Gaza so the people that don't breathe, they would have done that. But Netanyahu, in his statement as well, he said that they will find a mechanism to allow humanitarian aid to the civilian population where there is no fighting between the Israeli army and Hamas, so that they can split the civil society from Hamas. Again, another joke, because Israel always targeted the civilians primarily. Israel's main target is civilians. Israel's main aim is genocide and ethnic cleansing. What would that mean? That would mean that Israel would continue with the starvation campaign. We would have thousands of people, if not tens of thousands, dying every single day for a certain period up until the majority of the people are killed in this genocide and starvation campaign. This is not some sort of a dystopian anticipation or anything as such, or even pessimism. This is the reality. Thousands of people will start to die every single day, if not tens of thousands at some point, up until everyone is killed either by Israeli starvation or hunger, or as a direct result of the Israeli genocide in Gaza. How? Well, the countries that are saying we're going to recognize a Palestinian state in September or late September, they're basically giving Israel several months, well over a month, to continue what they're doing now. More and more people will be dying in this period or murdered as a direct result of this genocide, and they're still covering up for Israel. Some of them were saying if Israel doesn't reach a ceasefire, if they do reach a ceasefire, they might reconsider the option. However, what we do understand is that there is some sort of political and diplomatic pressure, nowhere near to the level that is expected and desired and needed, urgently needed, but there is some movement there, and that is primarily due to a result of the popular pressure against this genocide, against Zionism, against the humiliating and shameful complicity and participation of many countries with Israel in this genocide. So, what can happen if Israel does not reach a deal, which is now clearly being an option, in the words of Benjamin Netanyahu and the American administration too, Steve Witkoff and Trump too? Well, there could be potentially, especially from the countries that are still supporting Israel, more diplomatic pressure. So even Israel could be viewed as an even more of a pariah state. And mind you, in Israel, now they're talking about how bad they're doing, how bad their image is globally. And many reports in Israel are talking about the fact that it's irreversible now. There is no way to fix Israel's image across the world. What does that mean? People are saying our country is the enemy. We have irreparable damage being done. On the other hand, a cult blindly following Benjamin Netanyahu and co. in an endless war and an endless genocide. You have a huge crisis internally in Israel. The families of the prisoners of war and many in Israel are saying that our prisoners of war are going to be dying as a result of our policies in Gaza. If they expand the operations, especially to areas where Israel suspects some of its prisoners of war are held by the Palestinian resistance, that's a death sentence. The Palestinian resistance will not be releasing anyone alive if there is no deal. So if Israel tries to release anyone, assuming they have the capability, by the way, because Israel is in a huge crisis. The IDF is in a terrible shape. It's an exhausted, defeated, humiliated army. Tens of thousands killed and wounded. Over 100,000, some reports said, with PTSD. No one wants to join the army. Conscription attempts are failing. They don't have an image of victory. For the first time, we're starting to hear, even in Israeli mainstream media, about the fact that we have a strategic failure inside of the Gaza Strip. So where does Netanyahu want to go? And where could things reach? Well, one of the options is Israel would be viewed as an even more of a pariah state, and boycotting, divestment, and sanctions would start to become a norm, like what happened with apartheid South Africa, maybe at an even bigger scale, even coming from the United States at some point, because Israel at the end of the day is a neo-colonialist entity, and the United States and some other countries are still trying their luck. If Netanyahu is on a suicide mission, we'll see if that suicidal mission will succeed somehow, and we would be able to get the results and get the interests out of all of this campaign. Don't forget, there's a lot at stake here. It's the precedent that this is going to set for the future. It's a way that the Middle East or West Asia is going to be shaped for generations to come. And it's hundreds of trillions of cubic meters of gas off the shores of the Gaza Strip. We're talking about something very big. And from their perspective, well, Israel and those who back Israel, a lot of it is financial. They don't care about tens or hundreds of thousands of people or even millions being killed for financial gain. They don't view that as a problem. They use their own people as cannon fodder at the end of the day. But that's assuming Benjamin Netanyahu will succeed. Does he have an opportunity to succeed? Does he have any sort of option to succeed? Judging by what he has done so far, and by the fact that he has landed most of the available weapons that he has on the population in Gaza, over 130,000 tons of TNT, several nuclear bombs, equivalent of several nuclear bombs, starvation campaigns tried and tested multiple times. Now we're in the midst of a huge starvation campaign inside of the Gaza Strip. The aid that is being dropped into Gaza or being allowed into the Gaza Strip by Israel, either through Egypt or other countries too, is totally insignificant and is not changing the reality. People are still being killed trying to seek aid, despite any attempts to whitewash this image. So this could continue, but the Palestinian resistance somehow managed to continue resisting Israel throughout all of these difficult periods. I mean, in future, people will be talking about how on earth were they even able to? Because it's their houses that were destroyed, their families were killed, they lost everything, they're going through hunger and starvation, yet somehow they're still managing to stand up against Israel. From Netanyahu's perspective, he's assuming that the more time goes by, the weaker they get. But we did not see that in Gaza, again, by ways that we don't necessarily understand. And we can't always explain. How are they continuing to fight Israel in Gaza? How are they able to increase the attacks on Israel? How are they able to still have monitoring and communication over the ground? How are they still able to develop weapons? All of these things are difficult to understand. But what's for sure is, behind all of that, there is clearly a very strong level of faith and determination in what they're doing, whether it's from the population or from the people who are fighting Israel. And that's something that doesn't exist on the other side. On the other side, we have a defeated, humiliated army, a defeated nation that is in misery at the moment. If you see all of the feedback that's coming, by the way, from the Israeli public, the footage that the Palestinian resistance released in the past couple of days of the prisoners of war starving due to Israel were the most effective images and footage that these people have seen in Israel. And from their perspective, well, the whole world is talking about a starvation. We're denying it, but our people are also starving there, so there must be something. You need to be completely out of your mind to not realize who's causing that. On the other hand, the Palestinian resistance is still continuing with their same demands. They're not going to go to negotiations so long as the people are suffering with this starvation campaign. Today, more statements came from one of the senior figures in Hamas. His name is Ghazi Hamad. He said that not only will we not hand in our weapons, we will not hand in an empty bullet. No disarming. And we won't give an empty bullet to them. So that's out of the question. These things are clearly a red line from the Palestinian resistance perspective. And clearly the pressure does work, because something is going in. Insignificant, not enough, of course. The people are still suffering, absolutely. Not enough, 100%, but something is happening. And why? Because of the pressure, which shows you, well, the pressure does work, especially if it's coming from international countries who threaten Israel with sanctions. And if they had this position from the beginning, they could have prevented a lot of what happened, which again clearly shows and proves that they have been a participant in this, not just complicit or, just supporting. No, directly a participant. So we have several ways ahead. The first one is Netanyahu is going to go all out for his own reasons, his own beliefs, followers, people close to him. He's going to continue and he's not going to stop. What's going to happen? That pressure is likely to increase so long as the popular pressure continues and increases and escalates, because there is no political pressure without popular pressure. If there was no popular pressure against governments complicit and participant in this genocide, you wouldn't have seen any action against Israel, and they would have allowed Israel to kill everyone and starve the population, because their media doesn't cover anything anyway, and they would ignore everyone speaking online even if the victims are live streaming their genocide. But the likelihood is there will be more pressure. If this goes ahead, Benjamin Netanyahu continues. Then what is the military going to do? The military is going through failure after failure. The morale is at an all-time low. There is no morale for the people who fought in the genocide army. Israel's trying to, counter that by bringing some stories from Gaza, and they were heroes and they didn't die for nothing. The people are saying, well, they are dying for nothing. The majority of the people in Israel want a ceasefire, and they want an all-out deal. Where could that go? Let's say the sanctions and embargo and divestment and boycott, they don't necessarily stop Israel, assuming that the United States administration continues to support them, because that is a very high likelihood. Where could that actually go? Well, we need to remember one thing. Countries who are around Israel, whether they did not participate or participated in certain times, like Iran, they are seeing Israel going weaker and weaker and weaker. The army is getting more and more incapable. Less and less people joining the Israeli army. That only gives them more power and more advantage if they decide to have the final strike against Israel, assuming they continue. Another option is that Benjamin Netanyahu and the American administration are having all of these statements now as another attempt to take away from some positions that are coming from the Palestinian resistance, to show them that there is no way out, and you need to accept a surrender agreement. You need to accept disarm. Although the Palestinian resistance sacrificed so much, by the way, first and foremost by saying that we don't have a problem not to politically rule Gaza in the coming period, and having a technocratic government, for example, for a temporary period that would later lead to elections or a political solution. So that's a big sacrifice. Why? Because they were democratically elected. But this shows you how the Palestinian resistance is interested in having a ceasefire and is serious about it, serious about the talks too, is showing leniency. However, that leniency isn't stemming out of weakness. It's stemming out of a genuine will to de-escalate, a genuine will to reach a ceasefire. Hamas in particular offered Israel multiple deals way before 2023. 4 decades ago, their spiritual leader at the time offered Israel a long-term truce, a long-term hudna, with equal rights, and we have a temporary state here, but we definitely don't fight, and we commit to not fighting you for a very long time. Israel rejected that. And that truce that was proposed by the spiritual leader of Hamas at the time spoke about at least 2 decades of a truce, even longer than that, potentially. But this proves again that Israel had never had any intention for peace in the region. Israel had an intention to wreak havoc and chaos and destruction. In the meantime, if we factor in all of these opportunities, so this could be a cover-up and we might see a solution. No, Netanyahu is really serious. This could only get worse. Or it could increase in terms of escalation militarily, but the people will maybe have a bit more relief if more aid goes in because of more public pressure forcing more and more governments to take some action. If we see, so having these options, escalation, military escalation, starvation that could kill thousands of people, or this being a cover-up, there's something that is very important to note. If we contextualize the period that we're in now And if we look for the past 2 years, it has always been in an escalating manner. So things were only escalating time after time. They weren't de-escalating. How? Israel comes up with attacks and genocidal acts and barbarism, ceasefire, and then they starve the people and they carry out more attacks and they kill more people. For almost a year, then a ceasefire. But in the meantime, full-blown war with Lebanon. Ceasefire, but also very fragile. Attacks against Iran. Retaliation coming from Iran. The retaliation and the attacks, both of them, increase. So the potential of something coming is now also greater than ever. Similar to the prospect of a temporary ceasefire coming, because a temporary ceasefire will not end the conflict. The conflict is going to continue after any potential ceasefire comes. But if we view it from a military perspective, the chances of having a greater war with even more destruction is likelier than ever, similar to the prospect of a ceasefire, because no war can go on forever. But so long as it's open, so long as it's happening, so long as there is no de-escalation, anything can explode. And Benjamin Netanyahu, if he's still concerned about the polls and if he's serious about going to another term next year, or depending on when the Israeli elections will take place, most likely not in their already pre-planned time in October 2026, most likely earlier than that, Netanyahu would need to revisit his accomplishments. Why? Because, well, he killed many of the resistance leaders. He targeted Iran. The people in Israel are saying, well, you can't achieve more than that with the Palestinian resistance, and you attacked Iran. That's it. But the more time goes by, the more that moral victory, or as he sold it as a moral victory, even though it was garbage, by the way, because all of the threats against Israel are still there. The fact that some sides are practicing strategic patience or deciding not to respond at the moment doesn't mean there is no threat. They're doing that for their own calculations and own purposes, and as a reason to potentially surprise Israel at one point. Because a lot of what happens and a lot of the impact comes from the element of surprise. They don't want to be predictable and they don't want to give in too much information. So all of these threats are there, but Netanyahu is losing that moral victory that he was selling to the Israeli public and to the world of, look, we attacked Iran, look, we killed the senior figures of Hezbollah and this and that, and we attacked here and there. The more time goes by, the more the Palestinian resistance publishes these images of the prisoners of war that Israel is supposedly waging the war for and killing them at the same time. Of course, it's a big lie. From the beginning, they were killing them. They're not going to buy that victory narrative of Benjamin Netanyahu, because they'll tell him, okay, well, you targeted Iran, you targeted Hamas, you targeted Lebanon, you targeted all of that, but our people are dying. The same IDF soldiers, because who's remaining in Gaza now are only IDF soldiers, by the way. The same IDF soldiers who you sent to fight for the state of Israel and that you have a duty to protect, you're neglecting them and starving them and killing them and committing a Holocaust against them. In the Israeli words, by the way. So the Israelis are saying that. How is he going to have any sort of popularity? He's going to have popularity from the cult, but he's not going to have enough popularity to win another election. And it's only making it more difficult for him. Netanyahu backstabbed every ally he had previously. He backstabbed every person who collaborated with him in the elections. That's why Israel went through 7 elections in 6 years. primarily for the sake of Benjamin Netanyahu, who still was keen on and insisting on continuing in his role despite all of the corruption charges and cases against him that many people did not like, let alone the people who tried him as an ally or gave him an opportunity for their own reasons, and then recognized how much of a treacherous individual he is and how much of a psychopath he is. So based on the latest statements that are coming from today, regardless of what the intention is behind them, things are not looking good for a ceasefire. Netanyahu is clearly saying that, well, and they're blaming Hamas, of course, typical. Both the United States and Israel are blaming Hamas, saying that they're not serious about reaching a deal. So they're trying to justify going ahead and potentially escalating, or having some sort of mechanism to provide a very minimal relief for the population, and then continuing some military operations, even if they're not at the same intensity. But all of that means we are still going to be in an open war. And if the war remains open, it is extremely likely for it to escalate to reach way more destructive levels than ever before.